The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below. It's a slightly grayish Sunday morning here in New Zealand, but it still feels very high energy out there, and high energy here in my studio, where I'm looking at 6 more entries from our website participants for the 2019 Orchestration Challenge, which is to orchestrate an excerpt from The Seamstress by Mussorgsky, the first 13 bars. And yeah, so this is a entry from Andre. I'm not sure, Andre, if your name seems familiar. I don't have an encyclopedic memory of every single person who's ever submitted, but seems new to me. Anyways, if so, then welcome to our challenge here. So a few things here, just little points of interest, and that is that do we have all of the percussion instruments indicated here that we need to? On the second page, it just says in the left-hand margin, it just says perk, right? And here we've got cymbal, suspended cymbal, triangle. Yeah, you could say cymbal pair here, right? That would help to, when you've got both of them, it's kind of nice to sort of differentiate between the two. This is a very cool idea here to have two percussionists working in tandem. So if you get the build and you get the clash. Some people are not aware that you cannot really clash on a suspended cymbal. You can't get that big tish sound, the really, really percussive sound, if you are rolling in front of it, right? If you're rolling into it, then, every stroke, every hit from your stick is just going to be part of that build, right? So if you hit it, you put an accent here to hit it, especially hard, it's not going to really make that much difference. Even if you're going crescendo from, like, say, pianissimo to mezzo piano, and then you suddenly have a forte accent or a fortissimo accent, it's still, the building energy gets in the way of you making a firm kind of clashing stroke here. So that is something to look out for there. And it's nice that you're thinking about it. But look, there's like no dynamics marked here, right? So we don't know what you're building from. So could this be pianissimo to mezzo forte or mezzo piano, or you need to tell us. How loud is the triangle supposed to be? Okay, here you got the glockenspiel marked mezzo forte, and then you've got your winds marked mezzo piano, and then you got everything else marked piano. It might be easier just to mark this forte crescendo, excuse me, piano crescendo, right? So just go like piano and add a crescendo there, and then you can just keep doing that, just having the little crescendos, and you can put in a piano mark in like hidden, right? So you could go like this. Let's just say, for instance, were you to follow my advice, you can mark a piano dynamic here, right? And just kind of pull it back here. And then this is a little tricky. I'll just do it this way. So we'll do crescendo like that, right? And then you can put this wherever you like. Basically by holding down the Option or Alt key and then just clicking where you want it. And then so that the so that these hairpins don't increase the sound every single time, what you can do is you can just put a little, you can just save this, right, and then have it be invisible by typing Shift, Command, or Control H. And I'll just make a copy of it by, just Command C or Control C. And then I just put it here, and it is hidden, right? Now you can see it if you just select the passage. You can see all of those hidden objects, right? So that's one way. But yeah, but I wouldn't really mark this mezzo piano, all right? It's just, just let your world be piano, right? And then like use nuances and other kinds of things. Now, let's talk about the texture, okay? We talked a little bit about layout and dynamics. Let's talk about the overall texture. All right, well, what the playback was telling you right there is totally true. This is going to be a very thick, heavy, soupy arrangement. Now if you want that, then that's great. There's like, you could also think of it as being very dark and Russian. Now there are a lot of wrong notes here. Like for instance, you've got A flat in the cellos here when it should be F, right? And then there are a few other notes that just do not fit the harmony, right? That just like are a little weird, and you really do need to fix those. Were you to get this, polish the score up and maybe have like, see if there's like a reading in your area, like if orchestras read scores. Sometimes you see that, especially with like semi-pro regional orchestras where they like to have outreach to composers and orchestrators, right? So that might be worth doing for you, Andre. I don't know. But yeah, so you've got, with this kind of very smooth slur down to these, adding this to this, you just really are underlining that bass all the way through. Okay, and that's fine. And also, having these held notes here in the clarinet, that also kind of weighs the texture down a little bit. And not horribly, but it's still, still gives it that just extra sense of heaviness. Now here, I feel that you've got this reversed. You should give the lowest notes to the double basses and the higher notes to the cellos, right? Because especially in this case, the cello can, if you really want emphasis on this F here, then give it to the cellos, right? And for them, this note is going to be that note right there, which will be played on their C string, and yet the kind of the smaller, more projecting body of the cello will push at those notes, right? Sorry, this F here, I meant to say. So this F here, and then as to these A flats, they should be played on the double bass because they'll be nice and round and beautiful, right? So it just needs to be switched around, right? And this is just a lot of weight, right? Just to have both sets of violins. You got to think to yourself, if a violin like string sections, just think about the string section. So average, well-funded orchestra has 16 first violins and 14 second violins, then 12 violas and 10 to 12 cellos, and then maybe like 6 to 8 bass players and so on. Okay. So that means that you are asking 30 players, 30 violinists to all play this one line, right? Now here, this is cool because this is like divided up across the octaves. So that's different. But yeah, that is another reason why this is just so dense right in here. And interesting that you just have the, you have the glockenspiel on top, which is going to sound 2 octaves higher, right? So Glock is quindecima, so it's just like it's 15 notes higher or 2 octaves higher than the written note. Okay, and it's pretty effective. It's very cool. A little cutesy, but still pretty cool. Um, and this is neat. You have part of the melody being covered by, flute, piccolo, oboe. And it just kind of brings to mind one other thing that I didn't mention before. I should have. And that is, like we talked about, we're starting to discuss like which percussion is playing when, and it's a little strange. You got F horn here, and then you got trumpet in the next the next system, and highlighting it here, and kind of I'm sort of peeking at the next page off screen, right here. I can see that this is actually trumpet, right? I'm going to jump back now. So yeah, so that's a little strange. And then as far as these winds go, in a standard orchestra, you would get doubles on everything, right? You'd have 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, and you've only picked one each. So I'll just, I'll take you at your word that you just intended to have one player, but don't cheat yourself of like more textures that you could put in this, because these challenges, they're just they just really just depend on what you want to do with your music. And you might as well just select a larger orchestra size, unless you were specifically going to share this with an orchestra that is smaller, right? Okay, so yeah, so this will work, doubling 1 flute and 1 oboe on those pitches, and then with the piccolo an octave higher, that will all work fine. Which is, once again, it's just is a very dense, kind of unrelentingly heavy texture, and then this gets even heavier. All right, so let's discuss that now. You're kind of trading off clarinet to oboe, and then flute an octave higher as you go, and those doublings will really not make much of a difference with the strings like this. Do you know what I mean? Like they won't stand out; they'll just blend right into the strings. So there's just kind of nothing. And not to say that there's no point in doing this, but just that these doublings will not necessarily do anything until you get to right here where the flute starts to push into the next phrase. That will not necessarily be heard on its own as a flute, unless the flute player is out of balance, but it will add to the texture. But these will not really do a whole lot. Okay, and now here, like, this is another thing that is going to make things heavier, and that is just to have everything really slurred in the bass, right? As opposed to, like, say, the pizzicata that you had, or, but the slurs will definitely make it heavier. So if you were kind of wondering why it couldn't be a little lighter or a little, move a little bit more, that is part of the reason. Here on the second page, we see kind of a continuation of that. This is nice. The flute kind of covering these pitches, right? You could have also done this as like staccato, like they could have punched this note and punched that note, and then gotten kind of the same sense of support, right? Without too much dragging against the energy, right? So there's a lot that sort of drags against the energy here. This is all fine. These trills going to those little eighth notes, that's great. Once again, yeah, but just like heavy all the way through the bassoons and double basses. Now here, this is kind of part of the solution of what to do. You're doubling part of what's going on here, but it's it can be a good way to support that, right? But you just have to ask if you do want that smoothness as opposed to like more punchiness, right? But yeah, I like the fact that you didn't trill in the cellos or double basses way down there, right? Because kind of no point in doing that. And then you got violas being doubled at the octave by clarinets, okay? And then there's some problems with the harmony here, okay? And then we're sort of going for a similar approach as before, this time with the strings kind of pushing up, and then the violas and clarinets dealing with the melody there, and that's actually kind of fun. So anyway, so I'm sorry I didn't mean to beat up on you so much about the about the texture and the energy and the gravity, but I just wanted to make sure that that you knew that there were some alternatives there, that like you could maybe speed it up a little bit, maybe get more have more of a lighter kind of approach to it as well. So as opposed to kind of doubling things all the time, right? Or supplying different little bits that just sort of expand on what is already existing, right? So I'll just leave it there, but I'll just say, Andre, it's a really great, if this is your first effort, first contribution to the orchestration challenge, then I just want to say thanks so much. And I really would love to see another entry from you in the future, because there's some really cool stuff in here, and so just watch some of the other evaluations that I do, some of the other things that I point out in other scores that could be improved or might be good ideas or whatever, and just build on that, and I think you'd really enjoy the next entry that is coming up for 2020. And now we have Harry's very intriguing, very cool sounding entry here. Lots and lots of vibraphone. Okay, so a couple of cautions about this. I mean, while the approach is neat, I want you to consider that like this, while this scoring is really really useful for certain moods and certain kinds of things, that like be really careful not to pursue this kind of scoring so much that it becomes an end in itself. Do you know what I'm saying? So it was a really good effect to use here, but if you're just finding yourself relying a lot on mallet percussion, and it's just constantly a feature, and a lot of the textures and stuff are kind of focused around making it sound good, then it kind of doesn't let you grow as much as an orchestrator. It's something similar to Rimsky-Korsakov saying that like there was a phase in teaching his orchestration students that they'd fall in love with the harp and put it in every single bar, right? So that can also be true of vibes and other mallet instruments. So just watch out. I'm not saying that this is wrong. I'm just saying that like if you find yourself relying on it a lot, just try to change the way that you work. I'm wondering if you might have scored this like just transposing and then like changing like transposing in your head and then changing over to the instruments. Hey, let's all right, let's change it to a transposing score. All right, just to make it easier to read for me. So if you kind of just like looked at the D flat score and then transposed it as you went scoring, which would be pretty awesome, but might lead to certain mistakes, which I'll point out in the next page. Okay, so vibes are really cool. Here they are really dominating the harmony so much that I feel that what we're doing is we're really losing some of the context of that third beat. Right now here, you're throwing in this E flat in the cellos and bassoons, which really also belongs here, right? Right? It's like you need to put that in here as well. That's where it happens, right? So I mean, I'm noticing a lot of people are doing that. They're delaying going to the D flat until like the third bar. And maybe they're not reading it right, or maybe it's not clear in whatever source score was used, or something, or maybe different entrants are feeling that like we shouldn't introduce that E flat until here, whatever. Okay, but I'm just saying like I'm just noticing this happening. It's happened at least like maybe 3 or 4 times now. So yeah, so this should be an E flat, and I feel that you should reflect that in the harmony of the vibes here. Like if one of these Fs had been an E flat as well, then it would help to support the change on that beat, or on that baton stroke. Really, there are 9 beats proper in this time signature, but I'm just thinking of baton strokes, right? That is where the conductor is going to beat time at the beginning of each of these beam groups. Right. So that I would have wanted you to like, as your orchestration teacher, I would have had you throw in an E. Sorry, I keep thinking that I'm in D flat, an E, not an E flat. Excuse me. So yeah, this D should be an E. Excuse me for saying all those flats. All right, I'm in another world. Anyhow, so we got our pizzicato and the flute supporting these notes, and that's nice. And I like the clarinet, E flat clarinet, A clarinet supporting this. I would say probably this should be a D clarinet, right? In that way, you don't have to worry about so many sharps. Yes, D clarinets are becoming a little rarer these days. A lot of people just play the D parts on their E flat, but I would just say, if you're going to end up with 5 sharps all the time, I would say just score it for D clarinet. Yeah, and then this is a very, very, like, once again, kind of bell percussion, like the last entry. Celesta playing an octave higher than oboes, like so this is transposing to be written down an octave from the sounding pitches, right? So this is up an octave. This is violins doubled by oboes. That's a nice warm sound. Okay. Now there is like absolutely zero reason for the first violins to be playing this part, right? This is a supporting part. It should be played by the seconds. I mean, it's nice to give the seconds like a little bit of melody to themselves, but really this is a second violin part, and that's who should be playing it, right? I'm not saying that the seconds couldn't play this or they wouldn't be grateful to have their chance to shine, but it's just that the conductor is going to be looking to the concertmaster to lead the group, and that's the concertmaster's job, and you're taking it away from him here, right? That is the upshot of that. Okay. But other than that, it's pretty cool first page. And it was cool the way that you were bringing in the E flat clarinet back there, right? And then you've got some more for it right in here. And it's going to be a very strident sound, right? You're having it go up, and and then the flute kind of takes over for it here. And then here it comes in, and it's basically kind of dovetailing with the flute, and then there's the piccolo over it. This is going to be I'm trying to think of like what the translation is for the German word keck, Keck. So it's going to be sort of a like somewhat impudent, somewhat bright, like possibly too bright sound. And if you were pushing the E flat clarinet here to a sforzando, that's still not too high of a note, right? It's but it's still, yeah, it's going to be, it's just going to be very kind of shallow sounding right in there. So if you want that, that's great, that's fine. I feel we lose a bit of the pulse in here, though, just with the way that this kind of ends up right here. But maybe you were like kind of, it was sort of an incomplete scoring. Okay. Anyway. Pretty neat. I like the forte piano, and then going along to this part right here. I think the harp, pretty much by the time you get to right here, is pretty much inaudible, right? Like You can hear it here a bit, but like the denser and louder the texture gets, the more the harp is just completely, the harp part becomes, just kind of inaudible. And the same thing is true of the celesta part. Like you hear a little bit of this kind of silvery in the background, but it kind of goes the same thing, to my comments about vibraphone. Just like how much of it can you add? How much of that sort of tinkly bell sound can you add without it kind of dominating or like kind of always having to compensate for it? Like if you've got a sforzando trill on a C trumpet, nobody's going to hear this note, right? So just really, I would say, just take all this stuff away and just make the focus really be on the orchestra. There is a, sorry about my creaky chair. There is a kind of there's a piano-ness about scoring a lot of mallet percussion and harp, right? There's a kind of it's almost as if you're kind of bringing the piano into the score, right? Bringing your piano into the score and thinking with that, but just kind of like, oh, but these are going to be more elegant, more orchestral sounds. But in the end, if it sort of reads like a piano part, then you should just leave it out, right? And just figure out different ways to, different instruments, right? But other than that, this is kind of nice. I think it works. Clarinets plus violas is perfect. Flute plus first violins, but you've got an octave higher on the flute, and I mean, sorry, that was clarinets plus first violins with the violas an octave lower and the flutes on top. So, yeah, I mean, like you're gonna have very kind of shallow, like shallower kinds of sounds here. With that E flat clarinet and muted trumpet, metal mute. I mean, it's all really cool. Don't get me wrong. It's just going to be a very bright sound. So I mean, pretty workable. Pretty workable. There's a lot of stuff in here, but there's a lot to the score that kind of needs to be cleaned up a little bit. Once again, kind of need to know how many of each. Could you have used two flutes in some way? Had some trading off, two oboes, had some more harmony in these parts rather than just kind of strictly being functional lines, and so on. Maybe like bassoon supporting bass notes, like kind of carrying through the pulse a little bit more. Those are things that could improve the score a little bit, but it's still pretty cool effort, and I really did like that. Even though I was just kind of going out of my way to comment on not letting vibes rule your life, I still thought it was really a cool texture. But I just kind of got a little concerned when I saw this second page and the celesta and everything like that. But still, awesome entry. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. And now on to the next one. All right, and now we have Jessica's very cool score here. I mean, I get what you're doing here with the 1, 2, 3 problem here. It's you want to follow my dictum, and that is that you should double up parts wherever possible. But in this case, I think you could have made an exception and just had, piccolo, piccolo 1, and then flute 1, and then flute 2 / piccolo 2, and then just like done three separate distinct staves, because I did make an exception. I did allow an exception for parts that were just too complicated, right? So I think that would be a lot easier to score than having this this little bracket here. Okay, I think that's a little, I mean, it does the job, but I think three separate staves just work a little bit better, right? And you wouldn't want to mark this 2 and 3, right? You would want to have a piccolo one part and a flute one part, and then a piccolo 2 slash flute 2 part, and that way, because you can't really think of this as second and third flute because you haven't, one of the piccolo players plays all the way through, right? On piccolo, so that just creates a bigger problem. So this would be the first piccolo player, second piccolo player, and then later on you have muta in flute 2. Okay. And then you got your trading off and everything to sort of allow people to have some breath. You've got these little pointy notes, and they coincide with some of these plucks, some of this like little marimba note here, really nice support, and I really like all of that stuff. I like the little bit of harp in here. They're saying dampen harp for less resonance. I don't know if that's really all that necessary. You might try près de la table, which is just like right next to the, like, if you have something that's kind of slightly more guitar-like, and the resonance isn't quite as, it's more trebly, but it's not as, it doesn't have the same staying power because the string isn't excited as much, right? So that's one way of doing it. And then, you can also mute a harp by running a ribbon through the strings or what, but those things are really like kind of very much of a hassle. So yeah. You could also write secco, right? So dry. So the player will just will just play it in a way. They might have their palm kind of like trying to deaden the notes slightly as they play. So yeah. Anyhow, but I don't know if you really need to say that and have the staccato on it. I think you can just say secco, and you basically will get the same effect. Okay, but I mean, you can't do that and do this, right? I'll have a slur and then a staccato. I mean, I get this too, right? It's either this was just copy and pasting, or you really do intend that to sort of not be as damped, right? You want it to stand out more. So, I mean, that's all good. I really like the use of marimba, though. This is a cool thing to add, and I like the way that you break up all the different approaches, so they're not the same all the time, right? So you've got like piccolo plus flute plus bassoon, and and then you've got that supported by pizzicato and arco violins, and then just writing this F on the marimba. That's a cool approach. And then, of course, we have just pizzicato plus marimba, this time playing each pitch, plus oboe and flute and so on, right? And then here like harp plus oboe down an octave and piccolo. So those are all really cool textures. They're really neat ways to play around with this, Jessica, and I just really enjoyed this. Yeah, I mean, there's still a few things to adjust here and there. Like I'm not really sure what this diminuendo does. And what does that do? Right? Like you kind of want it to die away, then you should add it to each one so there's some consistency. Not maybe that just sort of crept in there, like as you wanted to increase and then decrease again, like to sort of have a bit of a push in there, but it still doesn't quite translate with the way that it's scored. Then we've got, you could just say A2 here, instead of 1,2, right, if you want to. And once again, more variety here. Marimba plus piccolo plus clarinet. That's very, very nice. Nice textures on these melodies, and really good use of bass clarinet throughout. kind of interacting with bassoons and so on. So just as not to tire anybody out, I would slur these bassoons. Now here, it might be worth marking like staccato or détaché or some other kind of thing like that, right? Because you've got otherwise you've got you have to let the conductor and the string players know that, like, even though the winds are smooth, the strings are going to be separated, right? And that's something that I did. I wrote like staccato or sempre staccato or whatever enough in my score to kind of let the players know that there would be a differentiation, right? Just checking this: up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, and so on. Down, up, down. It might be easier for the string players to just trill all of these notes and then go up on the staccato, right? And then that positions their bow better. Otherwise, it's like a down bow on a staccato, on a softer staccato, and then a down bow on the next one, right? Or they could go down, up, right? But it just, coming off of a sforzando and then diminuendoing, it's better to have the slur cover the first three notes. And that just is more in keeping with these smoother, like the smoother breathing that we've got in the winds right here. So you're keeping some of your same idea of, like, changing the texture around. Here you've got the strings, the first violin's doubled, and then you've got the piccolo an octave higher, right? And then you've got, it's kind of strange, like your violas are doubling your violins and then they drop out, which is a little strange, because you'll feel this loss of energy right in there. Then here we've got the violins being doubled by the flutes, nothing above. This is strange, this sort of trill kind of hanging out in the middle of nowhere. And then we've got the violas an octave lower. So there are no winds sort of doubling the lower lines for the strings. Just thought I'd point it out. You don't have to do that, but yeah, it might make things a little bit more uniform. And then we got clarinets doubling second violins. It's really not going to make much difference, which group plays it. You might be thinking, oh well, the second violins will give the first a break, and the seconds will have a slightly different timbre. And if that is what you intended, that's cool. It probably would be stronger just to give it to the first all the way through, just like the most consistent way to deal with it. And then of course bassoons and cellos, yeah. And then I've been cautioning people, watch out for like really low trills, because they have just like this kind of shuddering effect in the texture, right? They don't have that same kind of smoothness the lower you go with your trills. But I mean, it's still a cool effect, right? And always check any lower trills, like in the bassoon's bottom octave. Just like, always kind of like check with the bassoonist or look up. There are a few that are not possible. And there are, but most of them usually are, or they're workarounds or whatever. Some of the workarounds are a little clumsy, so just watch out for that. Okay, this is one thing I don't get, is coming in a beat late, right? And then the oboe dropping out in its support. Don't quite get that, but I guess you're trying to sort of reduce the intensity of the sound, right? And then just have this pick up and kind of start to dominate. So I mean, I guess that works. And then, yeah. About the only thing I would say is this, just like kind of the kind of back and forth kind of effect may sort of spoil things a little bit if it's used in here, because then like it can become a distraction. So the cadence here, like its function is less clear. Do you know what I'm saying? Right. I really love the soft timpani in here, and these little rolls and stuff. Those are really nice. I would say, like, it's really unlikely, if they're going to go tucka 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 tucka. I mean, yeah, I guess that is possible. have Justin's score, and as you just heard there, even just in a mock-up, this is a masterful orchestration, and it's something that could be published, right? I mean, and like Justin, I'd suggest you look into that. Really, I mean, it just really has so much life and energy and fun and it really has wonderful examples of things to do, right? Fun ways of tying things together, directing energy. That's the main thing that you could really learn from this score as as somebody studying orchestration. First, I'm just going to talk about the harps, and that is it's lovely. Everything is soft, and the harps can play loudly enough to to make a difference. I would say probably to write in roll marks, although that is kind of an obvious thing. But like if this were rolled, and even if the chord were slightly bigger, it would kind of help bring a little bit more weight and strength to those downbeats. But that's a picky little thing, really. And yeah, these could also have a little bit of arpeggiation to them. Okay, so as far as the strings are concerned, all of these things work great. They don't really need to be exchanged between parts, but it's done in such a way that it kind of keeps the energy shifting around the orchestra in a sort of an effortless way. And really nice how it is all plotted out so that the melody interacts in different ways across different string groups. Okay, so that's all done nicely. It's really great that there's this big punch right at the beginning, triangle plus glockenspiel, plus our little trumpets right there. And then the dancing around of the different melodic treatments, right? Flute to oboe to clarinet, and then finally piccolo right at the end. But this is what's really great, is the horns like taking us to the next section, right? That is just one way of, and since this happens, it is later on echoed by the trumpets, right? Not necessarily doing the same thing, but it still that because that texture was used at the beginning, this resonance here helps to tie everything together, right? So that's another what I feel is just a really masterful touch. And then these inner voices here, oboe just kind of contributing, and this is just really nice. This little explosion here of woodwinds, and just gives it just enough weight, right? It's just very, very nicely done. And even though this is the same treatment, Justin keeps it fresh. Adding the horns right in here, and then the trumpets answering once again, and then all of this tying together. Just it's oboes plus trumpets, and the harp. Probably this, I would say, Justin, this probably is going to be the point at which like the harp becomes kind of inaudible unless you were to jack it up an octave or so. But anyhow, that's also a pretty minor thing. But like the way that you have used softer brass in very tasteful ways, and then here bringing up the energy very strongly and setting this up, it makes these horns right at the end, which is just almost everybody's choice, including mine. It makes these horns just seem so fresh and necessary. Do you know what I mean? And then of course you got this little rip over the top here. Since I'm plowing through this so quickly, I'm gonna cheat a little and just talk a little bit about this next part past the A rehearsal mark. Yeah, and like here you go into a different kind of approach. Big pizzicato, triple stops. trading off of the clarinet. This is a little bit more like what we've seen in other scores, but like then just these little rips over the top, going back and forth between flute and then oboe. It's a pretty high note there, that high F for the oboe. Maybe not. I mean, it's playable, but it's going to be some work for the player, and not necessarily the clearest sounding arpeggio. But this is really nice right in here. This little phrase by the oboe and so on. And then I just really love the way that this completely sets up what happens here, right? Just like you've got this little bite in here of trumpets, right? And the harp is placed in a really nice place, right? This is probably all, I mean, this will contribute a little bit, but yeah, right here, just even if you just saved it till right here, that would be nice. And then just keeping the harpist's hand in that area with these intervals is also a pretty good idea. And then, like, just the use of the two harps in general throughout, I think is very strong, and yeah, and then pizzicato supporting the harp. That's all really nice. But yeah, that setting everything up there for the next page. So like, anyhow, this is actually a shorter evaluation, just because there's not a lot to say about this, which I would say, hey, fix this or fix that. More that I would just want to point out things that really work. Like the oboes right inside here. Working alongside the trumpets. This is a case like if everybody is really like listening to each other and balancing, like if the trumpets and the oboe players are really listening to each other, then it will work, right? Generally speaking, in this kind of combination, it would be more like muted trumpets working with oboe to get a really nice blend, and then you could have you could throw in English horn here to just catch that bottom. When you have three-part harmony in your trumpets, you could use the English horn to double that bottom note. But I mean, those are picky little suggestions, and certainly right in here where you've got the oboes doubling the lower trumpets, and then just first trumpet on top. That's also really workable. So I really like it, Justin. Thanks so much for sharing this with us. I'm so glad you were able to take the time out to do this. Especially with everything else you have to do, and and being a new father and everything else. So, if you can, anytime you want to jump in one of these challenges, your score will always be welcome. And thanks so much for being a great part of this community in general. And I think you've been with us from like the very start. So thanks for your great score. Thanks for being part of it. And now on to the next entry in this challenge. And now we're on to Raphael's score, and it's really interesting. Like the motion in the bass. Sometimes it feels almost like it's a little too paced. Like the just the way that it continues to repeat kind of makes us kind of focus on the bass rather than the rest of the arrangement, right? It sort of draws the attention of the listener to that bass line a lot, and especially right in here, right? But this is great. Just this one solid low E right here. That's really, really nice. And then this isn't bad at all, right? So I'm just wondering, maybe if you lightened up the bass in here, it would feel less kind of functional. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like it's there's some bass motion in some of these entries that that had kind of a it had a little bit of a it enriched the rest of the accompaniment. I don't know if this bass line does as much in terms of in that same way. Do you know what I mean? It kind of is really feels like it's telling the music what to do quite a bit. And here, this really kind of feels like almost like a piano part, right? This area down here, if you've got all this pizzicato in your lower strings, nobody's going to hear this at all, right? Because it's the pizzicato is so much stronger than harp that if you are doubling harp and pizzicato, you'll hear the pizzicato and you have to listen very closely to even make out the harp at all. So that's not what you want. You want your harp parts to be just really completely obvious, right? You want them to be very, very audible and enjoyable and part of what's going on. So speaking of which, this harp scoring will work because you're playing against a flute and a bit of clarinet as well, right? So, but especially when you get to this upward glissando, those are always very, very easy for the audience to hear. And it's nice the way that you're putting in a little bit of triangle here and there. That really does go along with this. Okay, but we're just once again, we've got like single winds on everything. So, in some of these parts, like here, you could have, if you had two flutes, right? You could have gone A2 right here at the beginning, because right here the piccolo, like this is the weakest part of the piccolo, right here in this first octave. Not really sure how much it contributes. Like right here, it will be very weak compared to just a standard flute, right? So it's just, it doesn't, at mezzo forte with the strings strengthening and the wind strengthening around it, this will just almost seem like a little folk flute up there. Not very strong, not very radiant. And then the first flute will come in and just be much stronger, right? Now this is great. This is beautiful for piccolo. This will just shine right out. I would say anything above C in the staff is great. Like this is all fine, but just using the piccolo as a second flute on lower pitches doesn't really do a whole lot for either the flute or for the piccolo. Sorry, excuse me, either the piccolo or the flute that it's doubling. Now it is true that Tchaikovsky used a piccolo and flute to double a lot, but generally speaking, it was usually on upper pitches, right? But like this just feels a little weak to me. So watch out for that. This is great. That is all perfectly fine. And I love, all of this stuff going on in here. This is great. Okay, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself, so I'm going to jump back so that we can think about the arrangement as a whole. All right? So long as all of these string players are really obeying these dynamics, then the harp will stand out as a good partner to the flute and clarinet as they're playing. And this is not too bad. Once again, we have a very regular kind of pa type of accompaniment. Right here in the middle with the violas. Okay, and this is actually pretty good scoring for those violas. That's all nice. But once again, we've got that very regular bass kind of telling us what to think, right? It's sort of it's framing what we need to focus on, right? Rather than just supporting. And horns coming in right here. I like this a lot. It's very, very, it's very heavy on the melody in all the winds plus the horns. Right, but you're not having anything going on in the strings at all in terms of melodic function, right? So it doesn't, it's balanced a little bit by that, right? Okay, so we discussed the winds a little bit here. yeah, you know, you've got a lot of weight sitting on the, you know, just on the same exact note. So look, once again, there are 30 players plus the soloist, all just hammering away at these pitches, right? And then here you go to the octave, right there with the seconds and the violas. It might be kind of nice if you were able to like stop the solo part right here and then just say, you know, unison with violins, right? So, you know, almost, or even have the, if you're, I don't know if your software allows you to do this, but have this part almost as like an ossia part, a little solo part, and then end it right here and then just go to unison. That's a lot clearer in the score. Because, you know, right here you've got 6 groups of strings. But, I mean, I can read it, and a conductor will be able to read it. But if you were laying this out as regular vertical pages, then you would want to like have your first page end here and then just get rid of this solo violin line and just have it unison with the first violins all the way through. Okay, that's just minor nitpicky stuff, but okay, so here you have um, firsts and seconds all playing the same notes, and that is, you know, you've got an octave higher scoring going on with here we're going to 2 octaves with the piccolo with nothing in between, all right? Which is, so this is going to be really, really exposed, this little line up here. And everything else is just making the strings feel very fat, right? These winds will blend right in a live situation. Very, very thick too. If you've got the oboe and the clarinets both playing the same exact thing, and then you've got these little touches of lower pitches, and that's kind of fun, right? It's like this will stand out. These will be absorbed into the violas and cellos, but it makes more sense to start it back here, right? When these come in, then they've got some support, right? Anyways, we got all this going. Once again, watch out about low trills. These trills is not so bad, you know, but like when there's trills on like C below the staff, that's when it gets a little bit far down, for clarity, right? I mean, it's not a question whether or not low, low strings, low winds, or brass can trill down at the bottom. It's just a question of whether, you know, what does that do to the clarity of the whole arrangement, right? Here it's not so bad, but you know, still just something to think about. You know, so that you know that you've thought about it, right? I like the way that the winds sort of leave off here, right? Give the ear a little bit of a rest, and then it all builds up later on, right? You know, comes in later on. And this high thing right here, you know, you don't have crescendo on your piccolo, but this is going to not relieve any tension, right? If you have these winds pushing towards this, and then the piccolo comes in on top, right? This psychologically, it's working against what's going on in your brass and your horns and your bassoons, right? You're sort of making a cadence here, and these pitches of this harp being on over the same exact area, this is not going to be heard. If this whole thing were scored an octave higher, with one chord in the lower staff, the left-hand staff, and one chord in the upper staff, and then the roll mark going between, like you basically put a treble clef here, have this chord split across both staves an octave higher, then you'll hear that harp, right? But everything's getting louder and louder and louder, right? So like some instruments are swelling and then going back down. Some instruments are just getting loud and not going anywhere, and then other instruments are pushing towards the end. This will not be a relaxed, there's psychologically you have 2 things working against each other here. You know, one is just getting louder as you go into the next section, and the other one is just is this part right in here, which is almost completely built to slow down and then give way back to a tempo on the next bar, right? So I think you didn't really think out the dynamics. So dynamics are just as much of a part of it as anything. It's like punctuation in writing out text, right? You know, if you leave the punctuation out, if you leave out a comma, if you don't have a period at the end of the sentence, then everything just kind of blends together. Do you know what I mean? And it's hard to tell where things start and stop, right? So just watch out for that, all right, Raphael? But yeah, I really did think it was very cool, though. Just watch out for things like the bass and for your harp scoring, and whether or not you got your proportions right with you bringing in certain elements, right? Otherwise, really fun, and I'm really glad that you sent in this entry, and please send in another score to the 2020 orchestration challenge. We'd love to see it. And with that, let's move on to our very last entry for this G group of scores for the 2019 orchestration challenge. And now our sixth score is just really a lovely way to end. I think that this is just a fun score. Really cool. A lot of neat stuff in it. A lot of little things I can comment on. That's the perfect balance for me. Some similar string patterning that we've seen before: pizzicato, timekeeping, and arco strings doing the patterns. That's all very cool. But the harps here just really nice. I would actually suggest rolling these harps to just like to bring out the expressiveness a little bit more, and cut back a little bit on such regularity of pacing. Okay, and just little teeny touches of timpani in here. They're making almost no difference in the sound picture, but still kind of fun. But this is beautiful right in here. The pizzicato here on the double bass, that's just really nice, and it has that impressionist feel to it, right? That like trying to de-emphasize some of our common strategies in tonal music, going 1-5, 1-5 all the time, just emphasizing the 5 and de-stressing the 1, right? That's a really cool idea. The treatment, I would say, of the melody is pretty cool. We've got oboes and bassoons and octaves. That's kind of fun. It's going to be very rich. It's going to have a lot of overtones, a lot more than you're hearing in this mock-up. And in fact, like this mock-up, I would say, even though it sounds very beautiful and gentle and delicate, this mock-up is about one of the least realistic for an arrangement so far. Like it's certain things about this are going to be quite different with a live orchestra. Okay, like clarinets and octaves, you'll get a very what they would call piquant, Piquant, a very like kind of spicy or slightly ear twisting sound of having clarinets and octaves. It's just because the overtones stack up in very strange ways over octave clarinets. It's still cool. I mean, it's still completely fine to use. But yeah, and this is great too, right in there. To reduce that effect, then just put like bassoon right in here, right? Then that'll take care of that. Now here, as you might have noticed in the mock-up, there's just barely any kind of any kind of addition to the force of sound. But that's not true in an actual orchestral example. This will be much more penetrating than the mock-up suggests, right? The glockenspiel on top both of these times makes absolutely zero difference. What makes the difference is, having so many mid-range tones, right? That's part of it. And then having the horn right here on the bottom, doubling the bassoon. It will just make this very, very firm, okay? I do like this little touch of trumpet right in here with the trombones underneath. That's so beautiful. And if the players do keep their sense of dynamics with the rest of the orchestra, it will not overwhelm the harp at all, right? Yeah, it probably don't need to write solo every single time a player gets a featured line because it's not really a solo. Do you know what I mean? It's a solo is when the entire orchestra has to subordinate to a part played by a single musician, and that's really not the case here. It's like this is more symphonic, right, than it is like a concerto, right? Like voices working together. The players will know that they have they will get the fact that they have a featured part immediately. So you do not have to write solo there, right? Just write one. That's all you need to do. One. All these parts, right? It just, it makes things confusing when the player, like for instance in this case, when everybody is playing together, you actually have two parts on the same, on the same exact notes, and you're calling them both solos, right? And so it just doesn't make as much sense to the player. But anyways, that's a picky little issue. I noticed that in a couple of other entries that instead of just writing one on a featured line, there was one solo. So don't worry about it. They've got it covered. They will understand what to do there. Okay, and now we're getting into the little scrubbing part that I've mentioned before, where we've got the octaves. We've got oboe and clarinet playing in octaves, and we're increasing this. I really love the introduction right here of harmony into this line. That is awesome. That is exactly what's needed there. And, here we've got glissando here and there. And just to point out, yeah, so you've got these. I would say, Vasil, that if this is what's intended to be played here, it's not really, it's really not a glissando. It's not fast enough to be a glissando. I would say just score out the parts. You know what I'm saying? Don't make it invisible. Make it visible. Do you know what I mean? Because it's going so slow, it doesn't really need these glissando bars. Now, are you aware of the harp glissando plugin that I've showed on a couple of other parts where you can just write the origin note and then the destination note? That's because that's probably just a better way of dealing with it. Okay, but I do like the fact that you put in the harp diagram right at the beginning. That's great. Anyway, I'm not going to mess with your score too much. But yeah, right in here. I mean, that's all spelled out. This just doesn't need just write out the notes. Do you know what I mean? It's going slow enough to where it wouldn't really be a glissando. All right. Yeah, and so all the strings just kind of suddenly joining in, that jolt. That's fun. It's like the opposite of smooth, right? Especially when you're adding these horns right in here with harmony. That's gonna make for. That is really going to jolt the beginning of that. Right? At that rate, the harp is not going to be audible at all right in here. Right? So crescendo to mezzo forte, the harp is going to disappear. Now, if you started a glissando and you went like really suddenly from here to way up high, then you would hear the harps, right? But the position where they are with all this other stuff going on, these harp notes are probably not going to make that much of an impression. Triangle is cool. Now, really watch out, though, because triangle trills or triangle rolls sound like a telephone ringing. Okay, so just really need to watch out for that. Here, because of the overtones of everything, especially the horns and all that, it will sort of blend in a little bit, so long as it doesn't get too loud, right? But it really will sound a bit, like, especially if you're really jangling on it here, like it'll sound like either like, like a cowboy movie where somebody rattles on their triangle and says dinner time, or like a telephone ringing. So just watch out for triangle trills. This all works pretty nice. It kind of makes me wonder whether or not there was some other kind of bell-like percussion or some other kind of thing that you could have used here, maybe antique cymbal or some other kind of thing, just to kind of give the ear a little bit of rest, because like the triangle has such a characteristic sound, and it tends to kind of really take over the very top end of a texture. And yeah, otherwise just really thick, heavy, dense textures throughout. I like the way that you balance the weight here. So notice what Vasil is doing here. We've got the divisi seconds either doubling the firsts or the violas. And that's the way to absolutely perfectly balance all of that, right? Because that way you've got 16 violinists plus 7 violists, right? So that's 23 players on the top line, and then we've got, let's say, 14 plus the other 7, so that would be 21, right? So that way it's a pretty even balance of strength on those lines. And then, of course, I actually think I suggested that in one of these evaluations. This is what that looks like. And now we have cellos. I like the dropout right here. That's great. It kind of keeps things from getting too scrubby-dubby. And here's that same scheme of bowing, Jessica. That's what I was suggesting. Just one down bow from the sforzando, which is very effective, and then just a little pop here on this staccato to bring the up bow to engage so that this can be down bow again. Right, but here I would caution, really watch out for low trills, right? So, like, and once again, not that the instruments cannot play a beautiful trill low down, but it just messes with the clarity of the passage, right? Like, especially if you've got trombones trilling, like doing a lip trill or whatever on this low G here, G flat, it's not going to be very clear at all. Same thing with the trumpet trilling on a low A flat there. This will be fine in the horns, and then of course the bassoons can trill pretty much everywhere, but like in their lowest octave, just always check, right, to make sure that all the trills are going to work. And it'll be, once again, it'll have a very rough sound. If you want like the entire orchestra to trill all the way, including all the way down to the very lowest notes. So just got to watch that, right? Okay. But there's not much else I can say, except this is really cute, right here at the end, right? Of these, this will sound very, like by the time it gets to the end of the phrase or of the slur, it'll sound very, very picturesque, right? And bring the passage to an end in a really cool way. All right, well, thanks very much, Vasil, and thanks everybody for your great, just such a fun. This is such a fun group of scores, and I keep thinking, there's no way that the next group of entries is going to be as fun as that last one was, and I'm always proved wrong because there's just so much fun things to discover, and there are professional efforts, there are really worthy efforts that need a little bit of cleaning up but could be ready for the stand soon. There are some people who are finding their feet as orchestrators and doing a pretty damn good job, for their first or second effort or whatever, So it's just really great to see the scope. We're all on the same road together, and the road is what unites us. Just like all loving to orchestrate, all wanting to know more, and that includes me. I am always learning something, and I often learn something from looking at these at these scores, whether it's a tip that I should share, whether it is just like some advice that I need to give myself about what I'm doing. It all really helps and it all counts and it improves me, and I hope that it is improving everybody out there watching it. And thanks everybody for submitting your scores and watching. And there will be one more collection, of sort of a mega pack of 8 website entries to come. So if your score has not yet been evaluated, don't worry, it will probably be in the very, very last 8. Thanks everybody, and I'll see you soon.